Hi, hello, can anybody see me? Can anybody hear me? It seems that YouTube claims that we already started the stream, so I would like to know if you can hear and see me properly. So if you could just put it, write it in the chat section next to the video player. I think you can, because I can see myself. Let me just mute me here. Okay, so hi, my name is Krzysztof Lis. I'm working at Hilbert as the customer success team manager, and the team that I manage is trying to make the customers that we work with happy, simply putting. We try to make the most money for the programmatic on the programmatic market for the publishers that we work with, and we devised the YieldShare as an opportunity to meet with you guys like once every month and discuss the most pressing matters in a more face-to-face way than just simply sending you our newsletters. So you can treat this meeting as a, let's call it a test of such an approach, and we hope to see you in a month or so, somewhere at the beginning of November, to discuss some additional things that we think would be beneficial and important for you guys. I see that you can see my face, you can see the presentation, so just let me go to the presentation. I think we will have like 30 or 40 minutes of talk at this point, of me talking at this point, and I don't think it would be a good place to have any deeper discussions about the topics that we are going to cover, because in almost all cases the issues that you might have are very specific, and we might not be able to cover or answer the questions today, but feel free to let me know if you need any assistance in terms of any of the issues that we mentioned. So how do I change the slides? Oh yeah, so it's the agenda. Like we mentioned, there are two issues at this point that we believe are the most important for the whole market. One is more in the now, and the other is like to be happening in the future, but we should try to address it at this point, because the sooner we do it, the better. So let's start with the TCF 2.0, or the Transparency and Consent Framework 2.0. It's just a new version of the framework that's built to manage the consent. The TCF is a set of rules and specifications that were devised to gather and manage user consent, a consent related to processing of their data. When the user loads a website, we show a small screen on the page, and we ask them to provide us consent for gathering and managing of their personal private data. Maybe not private, but rather personal data. And the TCF was built by IAB to create a standard on the market, an industry-wide standard that's going to be used by all the parties involved on every stage of the process, that's going to be understood in the same way, that's going to provide us with a way of doing it all transparently and smoothly and efficiently. And of course, it was done due to the GDPR regulations that are also followed by some other similar local regulations, like in California or recently in Brazil, as far as I remember. So this standard was supposed to help all the parties involved, beginning from the publishers that have those users on their domains, on their websites, through the SSP or supply-side platforms, the platforms that sell the impressions on the programmatic market. Also, all the ad servers need to take into account if the user agrees for their data to be used by the publisher or not. This consent needs to be passed to the DSPs, or the demand-side platforms, the platforms where advertisers buy the traffic, and eventually all the parties involved must understand the consent that was given by the user in the same way, because otherwise having it working smoothly would be more difficult. So TCF was introduced in 2018. It was TCF 1.0, but in the next year, the next version was devised. Simply, IAB asked all the participants to provide them with any input they might have to the TCF 1.0, and all the feedback was taken into account. Especially the publishers' needs were addressed in the TCF 2.0 because a lot of quite interesting feedback apparently came from that part. Not only the buyers and the SSPs were involved, but also all the feedback that came from the publishers' side of things. And initially, the TCF 1.1, because it was introduced in the meantime, was supposed to be supported only until the end of June this year, but because of the COVID pandemic and all the related issues, this transitional period was extended to the August 15th. So the initial idea was that we will have enough time to make this transition, but because of what was going on in the spring this year, IAB decided to prolong this transitional period. And honestly, I'm quite thankful for that, because the issues that were associated with moving from TCF 1 to TCF 2 are huge for some of the publishers that we work with. And as always, the more time we have, the better. So I'm going to explain what's going on at this point, and what we need to expect in the near future in terms of the TCF, the transparency and consent framework. Okay, so the most important change that was done to this standard, to this framework, was the increase of the data that's being gathered and passed on. Well, the previous consent string, the so-called, it's called consent string, and it's a form of passing the data that has all this information. This consent string is now a lot bigger, which means it contains significantly more information that's associated with what exactly this user agrees to. So this allows all the parties involved to have a more precise content management. It also gives the users more transparency, because now we can select specific parties that will have the user's consent and keep and have others not being given consent. We can select specific needs, what the publisher needs the data for to be used, if the user wants to be used in one way and not used in the other. And well, the end goal here is that the assumption is that the better informed user, the user who understands the whole process better, the user who can go through the details and give more precise consent, is more likely to give the consent, because if the user doesn't really understand or cannot see what's going on, what they have, what they might provide us with, they would be less likely to give us the consent, being a bit afraid of what exactly this might mean. So this change, it required a lot of work from the publisher's perspective, but eventually we expect that the users are going to be more likely to provide us with their consents, which is always a good thing, and I'm going to explain to you why is that in a moment. So the consent is used, for example, when we want to display personalized ads. If we want to target specific parameters or specific information about that person who's visiting our site. For example, we believe that the better targeting a campaign has, the better results the marketer is going to get. So the more precisely you can match the creative with what the user wants, needs, desires, the cheaper you can get, the cheaper results you're going to get, the lower rates per, for example, conversion or per click you're going to get. So we all, and by we I mean all the parties that are involved in the programmatic ecosystem, we all want to be able to target these users precisely, to put them in specific buckets or baskets or groups, and target only the groups that we think is the most relevant to the specific campaign. So in order to be able to do it, we need to ask the user for the consent, for the consent to manage to gather the information about them and to pass the information further, because if we don't have this consent, we kind of are limited with the targeting options that we have available. So the most important features, the most important issue from the programmatic ecosystem's perspective is that without these consents, we cannot display the personalized ads, which is always a bad thing, because we want them to match the user's preferences, interests, and desires as closely as possible. So, but this is very general expression, and it doesn't mean anything specific from the publisher's perspective. The publishers, simply speaking, need to implement the so-called CMPs, consent management platforms. Well, they need to implement only one CMP on their website that's going to properly gather all the information and properly pass it on. All the data that's relevant to the user's consent that was given, or maybe it was not given. So what does this proper implementation actually mean? Because, like I said, it's a very kind of broad term, and it might not mean anything specific. Well, for example, we need to start with gathering these consents in a correct way. So if the user opens the website, a small screen will appear with all the options that can be selected, and they can provide us with the consent. They can not do it, but we would rather not give them option to close this window without giving or not giving us this consent, right? Because we want to know if they are giving it or not. We don't want to be in a limbo where we don't actually know what's their decision. So this first of all, this window, this screen needs to appear in every case when it's needed. If it's for example, if it's displayed on the every impressions that's generated by the same user, so the same user, single user sees this screen a couple of times, they are probably not, it means that it's not working properly. The screen needs to be shown only once, and the settings need to be saved. It also means that it needs to be implemented and launched at the right time, because the consent needs to be passed on in the right way. What do I have in mind? For example, we have a stack of 5 SSPs and a Google Ad Manager on top of that, and we want to pass the consent that's given by the users to every platform that I just mentioned. So if this screen appears on the website, we need to wait with sending ad requests to all these parties to the point of time when the user gives or doesn't give us the consent that we want, right? We need to wait for their decision, and only after the decision is made, the consent is given or not given, we can send the request to the SSPs, to the Google Ad Manager. We shouldn't do it before this consent is given. So if for some reason the scripts of some SSPs are launched before this consent is given, it means also that it's not working properly, because eventually all the SSPs need to know that they can target those users and use their personal data. And if they don't know that, if they don't have this installed or managed properly, they're probably going to stop spending, stop bidding for the inventory that you have. We hear it from the SSPs, we hear it from the DSPs as well. I tried to ask our partners to be more specific or to advise us which results we should expect, like for example, could you please tell us what revenue drop we might see if we don't implement the CMP properly? And none of the platforms were willing to provide us with such numbers, probably because they don't have it measured precisely, and it would be only a rough estimate that might not be the case on the publishers that we work with. So we couldn't get this information back. But in general, we expect to see a drop in the fill rate, or the amount of ads that you are, the percentage of ads you are able to sell, and also the CPM rates that you are being paid for them. Because, well, targeting those users, targeting their data is not the only targeting option that's available on the market, right? We can do it in a different way. But if we are limited to only some of the targeting options, the buyers are not likely to spend as much, and not all of the buyers are even considering buying your traffic at all, because some of them might need to target specific audience groups. If they can't find this audience group on your website, they're not going to bid for it. So the less bidders, the less participants in the auction, the worse the fill rate and the worse the CPM, which eventually means the worse your revenue, and we want to avoid it. So at this point of time, we are in the 90-day grace period given by the Google that started on August 15th. This period was given to us to solve all the issues that we might have with the CMP integration, and there's a couple of those errors. Some are associated with sending empty consent string, some are associated with sending it incorrectly, and depending on the particular issue, Google will at this point serve non-personalized ads or personalized ads, or it might even display no ads at all. So we definitely advise you to check if the CMP is implemented properly, if Google sees it the same way as you think they should do. We try to go through the report provided by Google to check all the issues and discuss it with the publishers as well, but it's always better to have two pairs of eyes looking at the same data than only to have one. So at this point, the most important task for you is to simply implement the right CMP and integrate it with all the SSPs that you have in stock properly. So implement it in a way that's going to work with all the SSPs. So gather the information, store it, and pass it to the SSPs in the right way. We also are asking constantly the SSPs that we work with to provide us with the reports from their perspective that show how or where or when we need to make any changes. But like I said, it's always better to take a look into it from the perspective of the publisher as well. We don't have specific preferences in terms of the CMPs, the specific content management platforms that you should use, because there's a lot of them. We have the best results with, I think, 3 or 4 of them that we used in the past, and we have an article on our blog that lists those 3 CMPs. So I totally advise you to take a look at the article if you have some issues with the CMPs that you are working at this point. Some of the CMPs are better, some of them are worse. From our perspective, I mean, more difficult to work with, and I'm going to end at that, because the most important perspective is that the CMP needs to fulfill your needs and fit into your business model. Okay, so having covered the TCF 2.0, let's go to the changes to the third-party cookies that we expect to take place in the very near future. So the changes to the third-party cookies are associated with the changes in Google Chrome web browser, because at the beginning of this year, Google announced to stop supporting third-party cookies in the Google Chrome web browser in the 2 years. So in 2022. This was done to provide the users with more transparency, more security, or more sense of security, because we all see everywhere that users are getting more and more worried about how their data is used, how their data is stored, what's done with this data, and because of that, all the major web browsers need to address this issue one way or the other. But since Google Chrome is the most popular web browser at this point, and it has a market share of roughly 2/3, any changes that are within this browser will significantly affect the entire ecosystem, the entire programmatic market. I read somewhere that Chrome was one of the browsers that reached 70% market share, and it was the third one that was able to succeed in that regard. The first one was Netscape Navigator, and I have a quick question for you. Who of you remember Netscape Navigator? I think one of the first web browser that I had contact with. Funny thing, it was not, I didn't have the internet connection at my home back then, but it was Internet Explorer 3.0, and I bought a soundtrack from a movie, and there was some additional content, and Internet Explorer 3.0 was used to deliver this content. So my first contact with the web browser was on a CD. Funny thing, but it was like 20 something years ago. Firefox and Safari both don't support the third-party cookies for some time, but they only have roughly 20% market share. So we see some companies that devise ideas or ways to go around it and target Safari users or Firefox users, but you can expect how the change will be, how huge the change will be if it's affecting one of the most popular web browsers. The other two were the other two that had over 70% share for some time were Netscape Navigator and then Firefox, if I recall correctly. Okay, so what are the third-party cookies? These are the very small text files that are stored in the browser. They are used by parties other than the publisher and the advertiser, hence third party. So publishers can store their cookies. Advertisers can do it as well, but other parties will not be able to do it in a way that it's done at this point. These cookies are used to build audience profiles that can be targeted by specific media buyers who want to reach specific audiences. And when you are running a campaign on the programmatic ecosystem, and I was doing it a couple of years back, you need to match the perfect, or to find the perfect audience for your needs and target it. And some audience groups are provided by Google. You can create some audience profiles on your end, on the buyer's end. For example, you can create a group of people who are visiting a specific section on the website, but also a lot of companies, third-party companies, gathers information about the users, builds those profiles and sells them to the market. So not being able to use those groups means that you are given less options to target your campaign. And like I said just a couple minutes back, the less options you have, the worse, because it would probably mean that you need to pay more for the campaign. And of course, the whole business model of those companies is that they gather the information, they build specific user profiles, and then they are selling those profiles to you. It sounds not the right way, but they're not selling the people, they're just selling you the opportunity to reach them, to reach specific audience groups. So from the publisher's perspective, it means that you might see small impact because some users, some advertisers might not be able to reach the audience that you have on your domain, and because of that they might be not willing to spend as much as they were previously, and eventually you would make more not only because you would not display those particular ad campaigns, but also the auction pressure would be smaller, so the prices would decrease a bit. So we expect that any void on the market will be filled very quickly, and the new solutions, like I said, are emerging as we speak, and we don't expect it to last very long. I mean, we expect that somebody is going to figure a way to make it possible, despite the fact that these third-party cookies are not available in the Google Chrome web browser. But I think that we should not worry about it and instead try to focus on finding approaches that are feasible at this point, that can be used at this point. Try to devise new features, new options to target those users, and then teach the buyers, teach the advertisers to use them and invite them to do it. The first that comes to mind is the contextual targeting. So the contextual targeting that was present way back before the programmatic market even started. I myself made some money on the Google AdSense like in the last 15 or so years, and it was used very extensively over the time, and we expect it to be available in the future as well, because robots, I mean the crawlers, can crawl your content and try to find specific keywords on your website and then match it to the specific campaigns that they want to display. So this option will probably be available to some extent, because it might be the case that in the ad request that you are sending to the buyer or to the SSP, you're not providing them with a specific URL that the user is displaying. So if that was the case, the targeting would be a bit broader and more and less precise because of that, because the crawler might have to guess to some extent what this particular page the user is reading is associated to. So this is definitely going to be used, but also what I would advise you to do is to try to think of a way to target specific user groups, well, to define those user groups and to target them on the publisher's end. If, for example, you have a section of your website that's devoted to newborns, or maybe specific sports, or maybe cars, or something else, something totally different, and if you could assign a cookie to a person who frequently visits that section, this might probably mean that this user is interested in this topic. This gives you some information about who is visiting your page and how you can reach them, what ads you could display them, and you could sell this information to the buyers by creating a private deal on your inventory, private deal that targets only these specific users one way or the other, and then you would offer the buyer only the impressions that are generated by these people. So it means that well, the advertiser will lose the ability to target specific third-party cookies, but they would get your first-party cookies, the users as gathered, as defined from your perspective. At this point, it's only done through the deals, because when we create a deal, we just match specific audience profiles or specific key value pairs, or maybe specific ad units that are associated with specific users. And this way you can limit the impressions that you are sending to the buyer to the impressions that are probably the most relevant to them. So it means that you would have to move some of your business from the open exchange, from the open auction, to the private deals, to the private marketplace, but it's totally doable if you are in touch with those buyers. And if you don't have these options available at this point, this is a good time to start thinking about it. Try to devise a way to gather these users, to package them one way or the other, and then to offer them for targeting to your buyers. because no matter what happens in the future, this option is important for the buyers even today. A lot of the private deals that we at YieldBird manage for some of our publishers are associated with specific audience profiles as defined by the publishers. It's especially important for the programmatic guaranteed deal type that until recently was could only target first-party data, I mean the publisher's data or buyer's data, buyer's audience profiles, like retargeting data, but all the Google audience groups were not able were not available for targeting in the Google Ad Manager's programmatic guaranteed transaction type. So a lot of those PG deals were created taking into consideration these user profiles as gathered, as defined by the publishers. So if you have this option available, please let us know. If you don't, we can totally advise you, and I advise you to find a way to understand who your users actually are, what they are interested in, and what you can provide them with. Because eventually we all want to make the most money from the traffic that we're getting, and we also, on the other hand, want to display as few ads as possible, because the more ads, then the worse the user experience. So we want to only display the most relevant ads that are the most likely to be clicked, to convert, and to make you the most money. So like I said, these are the two issues that we wanted to discuss today. It was nice meeting you. Let me just check if there are any questions that we might be able to address. I see there are none at this point. Yeah, here's my contact information. Feel free to send me an email if you have any additional questions or think that we should assist you in one way or the other in one of these issues that I mentioned. I hope to see you in a month or so, rather in the first half of November, to discuss additional pressing matters that we think should be addressed on the publisher's end. It was very nice speaking to you, and I hope to see you the next time in a month or so. Bye bye. Take care. Stay healthy. That's the one of the most important issues at this point. Please stay healthy. Bye bye.